What is up, guys? In this video we're working on the YJ. We're messing around with the rear axle, the rear suspension, trying to get a couple things changed up. We want some more wheelbase, we want a better ride, and we're looking to get a little bit more flex. Oh. Since we put the 38s on the YJ and re-geared it, it's actually been doing pretty good off-road. Not bad on-road either. We're getting 18 miles per gallon. But one of the things that's definitely suffering is the on-road ride. The suspension in the rear is super stiff. On this channel, we don't really do pretty good. We just try to continuously improve everything we have. So after every trail run, there's usually something that I'm not liking about whatever vehicle I'm driving. And my goal is to improve that and make it better. So it's time for the YJ to get one of those improvements. My goal here is to move the rear axle back about 1 inch. While we're doing that, we're going to open up that wheel well so there's more room for that rear tire to stuff in there. And then I'm going to take at least one leaf out of the rear pack and try to soften it up a little bit. Hopefully that'll get us some more flex too. Well, it didn't take too long tearing apart this rear suspension to find something a little strange. This is a bolt with a ton of flat washers on it. Apparently this was on there to help clear the gas tank skid, but when I find stuff like this, it makes me wonder what everything else is gonna look like. Another issue is we're pulling a bolt out that's a 1/2 inch inside a 9/16 hole. That's a problem. There's a lot of wiggle room in there, so we're definitely gonna have to get some new bolts, and to prevent this from happening, we're probably gonna have to change up the gas tank skid too. We'll see. This is also something I wanted to take care of. This is getting rid of a revolver shackle in the rear. I think on some lighter vehicles like Samurais or maybe like a leaf spring buggy, these shackles will probably be okay. I really only see problems coming from it using this on the Jeep, so we're gonna try going back to a standard shackle instead of having this one for now. We'll keep them around just in case I decide to put them back on. A lot of the bushings that come in these kits you get for replacing these springs are basically divided up into two camps. It's the OEM spring versus an aftermarket spring. They can have different size sleeves inside those bushings and require different size bolts. Even for me, I ordered some new bushings for these because I'm going to kind of rebuild and just really refresh these springs. And I don't even know what size bolt is going to be in there. I tried to figure it out on their website and stuff, and they don't really say. They just say they're grade 5 and they're great and all that. But are they 9/16? Are they 1/2 inch? I don't know. The good news is you can always drill out those 9/16 in your shackle or in your shackle hanger, your spring hanger, any of those things. You can drill them out from 1/2 inch to 9/16, it's not that big of a deal. Some other good stuff. This shackle bolt is a square head. Interesting. I'm not sure if we're going to get to it in this video, but there are these shock mounts. I don't want to just cut those off and not use them anymore. And on the other side, we've got some brackets that are not being used, so that could just go. Eventually, I'd like to get a truss on this rear axle just to help strengthen it up and redo all the brake lines. But I also don't want to miss out on wheeling this thing this season, so I'm kind of trying to do like just a little bit here and there. And also, I don't want to get too carried away with these springs, because if this doesn't work, you know, it changes our pinion angle a lot, or the springs are just too soft like that, or we're getting spring wrap or anything like that, then I just need to change it back. This was supposed to be a pretty simple job here, and you can see just all the stuff we've been cutting off here and grinding down. And yeah, there was a lot of little nicks and brackets that we needed to smooth out. We still have to go over this with a flap wheel, but this is what I'm most concerned about now. There's some really big gouges in this axle tube. Looks like it's from trying to cut off the purchase from when this was spring over. You can see some heavy weld buildup right here. Needs to get smoothed down. That is a pretty good gouge in there. It's gonna have to get fixed. So we're gonna prep this to get some weld on there, smooth it out. We're already kind of pushing these axles to the limit, being that we have 38s on 44s, so I think we're gonna end up having to throw a truss on here, and I've got one ordered. We're gonna throw it on there and I was gonna kind of just run it like that, but after looking at how much damage is on these axles from modifications, I think what I'm going to do is stretch that truss out a little bit more, at least out to where the perches go, just for some added strength, you know, and some peace of mind, because these axles look like they've been through hell. All right, got our simple 44 rear truss in from Barnes. So I'm thinking it'll probably sit something like that on there, trying to line up the top with kind of the center of where perches are, so this thing isn't in the way. And you can see it's not sitting like perfectly straight on there. It's a little bit forward, and that's fine. We do have some other issues though. One thing that we need to address is our vent tube, which is that bigger threaded hole right there, and the other one was just for brake line, so we can cover up that brake line one. The vent tube, not really sure what we're gonna do, but I think before we mess with any of this, I'm gonna throw this axle back under there with our new center pin and everything, and just kind of see how it's gonna look, because I really don't want this truss to get all welded up and then find out that it's gonna hit something up there. So we're gonna start putting on the new shackles, the new springs, how they're set up, and kind of just see where we're at. All right, so there's the axle in its new location with the plates pushing it back 1 inch, and it's kind of hard to tell with the gas tank and this drum in the way, but we're gonna be close with the diff cover on the gas tank, so I don't know. We might have to end up modifying that gas tank for just 1 inch rear, but it's in full droop right now. When we put some weight on this axle is gonna move back even more. Yeah, it's gonna be close. So we're gonna drop this back down, and we're gonna start getting everything ready for the truss. These bolts that we're holding the brake lines on, I'm just gonna put some RTV in there and then thread the bolt back in case we wanna use that later for some reason. The breather tube, I don't have a problem drilling in the truss and just running that hose back up there. That way there's less drilling in the tube. We don't have to put a new vent in there or anything. We can just keep it where it is. So that's what we're gonna do next. Let's drop this down and start getting everything ready for putting the armor on here. All right, axle's back out. See, we got the grease gun out, because what I was doing is marking up where this truss is gonna go, where the welds need to be. That way we can clean it up. This part's already really clean, and then this part needs to be cleaned up. And I just put a little bit of grease on the end of this breather tube, lowered the truss on, and wherever that grease mark transferred to, that's where we're gonna drill out our hole so we can access this in the future and also put our breather tube on there. So you can see right there is our little grease mark. That's where we need to drill out. I'm gonna do a pretty big hole, 1.5 inch, something like that, and we'll see. I might have to do it on the bench. Maybe I could fit it in my press here, and we'll move on. So we've got all the pieces cut out. This is the smaller one on the shorter side of the axle, and this one's just a little bit bigger because the differential isn't centered in there. So got the truss from Barnes, my kind of home brewed extensions. So you can see there's a line right there that I drew. That is actually where the U-bolt is gonna go to hold the plate on. Same thing on the other side. So went over it a little bit. I think after I start getting this welded on, it's gonna make a little cut right here, maybe 75% the way through, and hammer it down so it hugs the axle a little bit better and clears that line.
fine. But speaking of welding, it's always a little bit nerve-wracking welding on an axle housing because we don't want it to bend. That'd be basically the opposite of what we're trying to do with this truss. So we're trying to make this thing stronger. We don't want any bends to happen later on. So what I usually do when I'm welded on axles, two things. I do not want it to heat up too fast, and I don't want it to cool down too fast. So the way we're going to prevent this from heating up too fast is we're going to weld on opposite sides of the axle and only for a few inches at a time. Then we're going to take like a 5-minute break and get back to it. The cool down, that's a little bit harder to do. One thing I can do is get a torch and kind of go over those welds and get them all heated up again, then wrap it in a blanket, a welding blanket, let it cool down slowly that way. So I think that's what we're going to try to do. I think on the top parts of this truss here that aren't on the axle, I could probably go a little bit longer on the welding for those, but for the most part, we're going to try to have this heat up and cool down nice and slow. All right, the axle's all wrapped up. It's all in a little welding blanket here. So it's the whole thing's pretty warm still, hot all over, and that way as it cools down, it's all kind of doing it evenly and it's doing it slowly. So when we come look at this again, hopefully it's still in a straight line. These axle relocation plates, they actually have 3 different places you can mount them. You can do it in the same spot. You can do 3/4 or an inch stretch, either forward or back. We're gonna go a full inch back, which means we need to drill out the U-bolt plate also. All right, got pretty much everything done now. What we need to do is just reassemble. So we've got to prime, paint, and clean up really the rest of that axle and any leaf springs. Then we're going to put it back up in the Jeep. I've got to build a simple brake line that goes down the whole thing and then connect the brakes, new U-joint. So that's all pretty easy, boring stuff. I just closed up shop. Really, I got to clean up the garage. This kind of project just destroys the garage. I kind of need to sort out my tools and just clean everything up. And we're going to come back when I've got this all bolted in, and I'll let you guys see how it looks, and hopefully we'll be ready to go after that. Well, the cleaning up the garage part didn't happen. I kind of was thinking, you know, if I'm going to be doing all this work still and putting this axle back under there, it's going to get all dirty again. So I decided to put it off, but we're pretty much at like 95% right now. So I'm going to show you guys where we're at, and we'll just end the video here because I found something new that's a huge problem that we're going to have to put our attention on next if we want to keep going. So let's check out what I've got with the axle going now. It actually looks pretty good. Everything's pretty much bolted up, and you can see the new U-bolt plates, and the U-bolts are really short, both of them together. I've got that little pin hanging down right there that we'll need to chop off, but that's easy. And it's kind of hard to tell from this angle, but the amount of clearance we got from those U-bolt plates is worth all this time alone, because it's like 1.5 inches, and that is a ton of clearance to have. But we've just threw a fresh coat of paint on everything. The welds turned out pretty good. We got some pretty thick welds on everything. Looks pretty clean. No obstruction with the diff cover on the gas tank yet. And you can see a little bit of the brake line over there. I'll go to the other side here in a second so you can see how the front looks. But overall, very satisfied with this. I feel a lot better having that truss on there now. And like the brake line and the breather tube are all a little bit closer because they're on the top of this truss now instead of down here. So I feel a lot better about those lines not getting stretched also. So this is what we're looking at on the other side. You can see we've got our brake line going up and around the whole thing. I welded a bolt on right here, slid the tube clamp over the brake line, and then bolted it down. So that was a lot easier than drilling and tapping into the truss. There's another look at the clearance on the U-bolt plates, and you can just see how flat that is. I mean, it's like basically right under that spring. We only have like maybe 1/4 inch of plate hanging down, so a ton of clearance. You can see we've got the shock just floating right now because originally the shock mount went like right here. And I thought, man, that is so close to where this U-bolt plate is already. My plan is to just get a bolt welded on right here on this U-bolt plate and then we can just slide the shock on right over that. I'll probably get some little piece of skid over that so the shock doesn't get hung up on everything. But that's basically the plan for both sides. We really don't have a whole lot left to do. We just got to put the shocks on, bleed the brakes, and then we need to get our drive shaft put back on, and the rear end should be good to go. So I mentioned earlier that I found something new that we need to address. I came out here, and when I was working on this rear axle, I saw that there was some engine oil just sitting under the Jeep. So I'm like, what is that about? Apparently the last time we were at Hollister in the rock pile, we had a little bit too much fun, and we really dented in our oil pan. Check this thing out. Ka-chow! Like right at where the drain plug is too. So it's toast, it's leaking oil out. And of course our exhaust got a pretty good pinch on it too. Right here, it's hard to tell from this angle, but this is pinched really good. So yeah, not only do we need a new oil pan, we might need a new oil pickup, and then we need a skid to cover this whole part. We really just can't be leaving this stuff all vulnerable. Our exhaust, transmission, and our oil pan, that's all got to be covered up. So a skid is in our future. Definitely don't want to be having these little side projects go on the whole time while we're trying to build the Jeep. All right, so quick recap. What we were trying to do was move the rear axle back 1 inch. That way we could have a bigger opening for our tire back there, and it wouldn't be getting into the body so much. Also, it's just nice to have more wheelbase. I enjoy that, especially on a 2-door. It'd be nice to have it be a little bit longer, just so it's more stable when we're climbing up those steep obstacles. While we were doing that, I figured, hey, why don't we take a leaf out of the rear spring to make it a little bit softer, get a better ride, and maybe some more flex. We didn't toss the leaf that we took out. In case this doesn't work, we can throw that back in there, or maybe we can try taking a different leaf out, all that. Then when we started to tear into that rear axle, I saw that it had a lot of damage on it, so we decided to put a truss on it. After we put the truss on it, decided to extend the truss a little bit more. Then we ended up replacing all the bolts. The bolts in the spring hanger are 9/16. The bolts in the shackle and shackle hanger are 1/2 inch. They're all grease fitting, so that's really nice. We also put a longer shackle on there. I believe it's 6 inches, and that's going to net us about 1 inch of lift in the rear, which was sitting about 1 inch low already, so that's perfect. And then lastly, what we decided to do was change out those U-bolt plates so they're more flush with the leaf spring and get some more clearance out of it. So it took us a few weeks to do this actually. That's why my clothes kept changing the whole time. Every time I ran into a problem, I kind of had to go get the supplies or the parts or whatever. Now it's good to go. We do have to do a bunch of things before we can actually start wheeling it. We've got to fix that oil pan, maybe the oil pickup. The front, we still have the huge body lift, 3 inches of body lift, and I wanted to take 2 of that out. So I have a 1 inch body lift to put in, but we're gonna miss some trail runs if we don't go with it as is. One thing I do need to do is put the fender liners in. I ended up getting some. That's probably gonna be the next video in this series, because the oil pan and the oil pickup, I don't think that's gonna be that interesting for you guys. Plus, we're not really building it, we're just fixing that. We've got a lot more coming. After we fix that oil pan and stuff and we get these fenders in there, I think after that, our next one is going to be the front end, which is going to be the big one, because we're going to do a shackle reversal and we're going to stretch the front axle probably about, I'm guessing about 3 inches. We'll see. That's going to be a little bit bigger of a project, and I'm sure we're going to run into some good stuff when we do that too. But thanks for checking out our video, guys. If you're really enjoying this content, or you have a YJ or a Jeep and you want to follow along with this build and get some ideas for yours, definitely consider subscribing. That way you can check it out with us, and I could use the tips. Whatever you guys put down there in the comments, I read them all. I know a lot of you guys have way more experience, especially with the YJ. I want to know what you guys are doing with yours. Thanks for checking this out, guys. See you in the next one.